Welcome to #Mindshift Talk, powered by CreateMindSpace with Katrin Buisman.
But we started that conversation with this idea of examining our stories, and we started with a settling kind of mindfulness practice. And in my mind, as somebody who's kind of the keeper of our company culture, those things have drawn us closer, have brought a different level of trust and compassion for one another. And I think, mindfulness is one of the ties that binds all these sort of culture building exercises together, as well as the intention to love and trust.
This is a platform to share, educate, and inspire. Welcome to our 4th episode of #Mindshift Talk. I'm very excited to announce my next guest speaker, Toussaint Bailey, to our series about gaining insights and acquiring tools to implement mindfulness and emotional intelligence in a corporate environment. Define challenges, determine possibilities, create opportunities. Toussaint Bailey is an impact investor and the CEO of Enso Wealth Management. Enso Wealth Management was recently named one of Financial Times' top 300 wealth management firms, having grown to over $1 billion in assets under management since its founding in 2017. As an impact investor, Toussaint focuses on expanding accessibility to impact investments and re-envisioning impact themes to include underrepresented fund managers and founders. At Enso Wealth, he operationalizes the firm's mission to translate wealth into fulfillment. Outside of his finance work, Toussaint created the Just Listen project, which is endeavors to heal racism by feeling into the personal experiences of unheard colleagues and friends. He's an avid student of the science of well-being and emotional health. He serves on the board of advisors of Search Inside Yourself, a Google-born practical mindfulness, emotional intelligence, and leadership training organization. Most importantly, Toussaint is a proud girl dad to the 3rd power. Thank you so much for being with us today here at #Mindshift Talk. And I'm really excited to have you. And before we go into a broader conversation around mindfulness and emotional intelligence, mainly at the workplace, but as well for the personal path, it would be great if you could share a little bit about yourself and maybe where you are today and what people maybe should know about you when they really get to know you better.
Yeah, so I always like to start with, I'm human. I'm the next most important thing is I'm a husband and a father. I have 3 young daughters, so 3-year-old twins and a 5-year-old. They are my most important work and probably my most difficult and challenging and rewarding work all at the same time, as well as my marriage. Professionally, I'm CEO of a wealth management firm called Enso Wealth Management. I'm also the founder of an impact investing firm called Uplifting Capital, a very young impact investing firm. At both of those places, mindfulness has figured prominently into my journey there, as well as kind of our experience in our culture and what we've built. So I'm excited to get into all of those things. My path to wealth management and ultimately asset management has been a very jagged one. I was a litigator for many, many years, actually until I went to a mindfulness-based leadership conference called Search Inside Yourself, where I sort of had this aha with enough quiet time and enough mind space that I realized I was probably going to transition out of law in litigation at some point, and it took me a couple years from that point to fully transition, and realized that I wanted to get into something else, something that was about building and something that was a little bit more constructive. I enjoy the problem solving aspect of litigation, but it's an exhausting place to be, to kind of be in this contentious environment. And it was something that I realized with some mind space that I energetically evolved out of. And so I had this opportunity to work with friends and build this company. Then that was just starting, called Enso Wealth. And I sort of jumped at the opportunity and pursued it in pieces. And it's been something that I've been happy with ever since. So that is a roundabout way to get to being a CEO at a wealth management firm, but I feel solidly here now.
Nice. Yeah, that sounds amazing. And so you mentioned already a little bit now, so you really went on a path like discovering mindfulness really for yourself. Was that just kind of, it just popped up for you to go there, or how did you find kind of that notion to go there?
Yeah, no, I backed into it. Funny enough, my mom has been a mindfulness practitioner. She was a mindfulness practitioner for most of her adult life, and it's just something that I hadn't taken to as an adult, but was sort of normalized for me. But the way that I got into mindfulness meaningfully for myself was actually through work and looking to develop some of these soft skills at work. And so I went to the Search Inside Yourself course, and prior to the course being a type A, I read the book, right? So I signed up for the course and thought, oh, there's a book about this course, so I'm going to read the book. So I read the book, and in that realized that this was really a mindfulness-based emotional intelligence leadership course. And so I came to it for the leadership, but ended up with these sort of internal tools that really have become something that's really served me. And so I did the course and started this journey. I think the next thing that I went to was looking at some of the apps where you can do meditation regularly. And so I started meditating regularly and journaling. Ultimately, took our team back to to the Search Inside Yourself course, and that was just kind of an introduction to mindfulness for them. Started venturing down the road of teaching mindfulness, although I didn't venture very far down that road because I realized that I'm probably better off dabbling rather than diving into that. There's many professionals who do that well, so I'll leave it to them. But now it's just become a really integral part of my life, my daily life. I can feel the difference between when I honor my practice and when I don't, and it's become an integral part of running a firm. I haven't forced it upon anyone, so it's not as deep in the firm as it is for me personally, but it certainly has influence on who we are and what we do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, nice. Yeah, I actually was with the Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute too. In 2016, I did the Engage program with them. And yeah, I really love the approach. And it's a big part of how I'm teaching today too. Just the combination with mindfulness, emotional intelligence, and the neuroscience behind it. So did you do the two-day course, or they
I did offering? The 2-day.
Yes.
I did the 2-day course in 2016. You weren't in San Francisco, were you?
I actually was. Yeah, I was kind of back and forth, but I stayed in the Silicon Valley at a friend's place for a while, and I was lucky to be there for a while. But it was a 9-month class, but it was 2 times in the Bay Area. So yes, I went there too. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So I did it. I did it in San Francisco in the Presidio in 2000.
Okay. Yeah. Exactly. That's where we were too. Yeah. It's a beautiful place.
It is.
Yeah, nice. And yeah, you mentioned already a little bit about mindfulness and how important it really got for you on a personal level, but then as well, like bringing it into the workplace. And I would love to hear a little bit more about a project you started last year, the Just Listen project. It's such an important platform to have today, especially with the happenings in the world. And can you maybe share a little bit about that project and what made you drive to start it?
Yeah. So the Just Listen project is a project endeavoring to heal racism by hearing the unheard stories of colleagues and friends. And so part of that started with a conversation at work, actually. So we do, we start every all hands meeting. So when we have these monthly town halls, we start with first, a breathing exercise, and then we go around and we do a check-in. And we have this one word check-in where everybody provides one word about how they're feeling, and then they give a little bit of explanation. And the one word check-in that we had shortly after George Floyd was killed was really the place where the Just Listen project started. So I checked in about being somewhat distracted by all the events that were going on. And it was the first time that I kind of broached the conversation about racism at work. And I just remember all of my colleagues kind of rallying around and coming forth in support. And then I had this very kind of deep and emotional conversation with one of my colleagues about race and racism shortly after that. And I just realized the value of being able to share some of my stories related to racism, being able to share my perspective with some of my colleagues who may have not heard that perspective before. And so something that I was recommending to friends who called and asked kind of what can we do in this moment? What can we contribute? I was recommending that they call friends and have these sorts of conversations. And part of that was what I was thinking was for their learning, right? So they could better understand and become more empathetic. But what I realized in having the conversation for myself was there's this release that came about from just being heard and being able to share my story and kind of learning to value that story. And so the Just Listen project just was something that organically started to promote those kinds of conversations, and also to kind of equip people with some of the tools that are necessary to have those conversations. So a baseline understanding about kind of race, and understanding of some of the emotional tools that and mental tools that are necessary to kind of examine our internal experiences. And some of those same tools are necessary to sit with the internal experiences that other people are sharing while they're sharing them. And then kind of understanding rebalancing what these stories mean. So not necessarily looking at these things as things that separate us, but learning to come together around some of our experiences and some of our histories and some of our misunderstandings, and then taking those conversations and sharing them out is sort of the idea behind the project. And I've had a few of those conversations. I want to have more of those conversations and record them and promote them. But I've just been inspired to continue talking about these things and even taking my career further in the direction of promoting this kind of work.
Yes, yeah, no, it's so needed, definitely. And I think, I really love how you really encouraged people to share, but then as well to listen, right? And to really get an understanding about what is going on. And I think it's one of the tools I'm using in my classes as well, the mindful listening. I think it's just, I feel like that's a like framework you're using, right? It's like really kind of bringing that empathic approach in there to really, feel like connect to the humanness of the other person. Or what do you think is that power? Like, because I think it's such a powerful tool to really connect on a different level.
Absolutely. And it's something that, when we have these big problems, these very charged problems, it almost feels like you're not doing enough by mindfully listening or by sitting and listening with the intent to empathize. It feels like I should be doing more. I should be, out shouting or donate. And sometimes we move to action, to those kind of knee-jerk actions without really developing the empathy for the problem, or without realizing that there's real healing to be done just by listening and creating space and holding that space. And so, I'm a big believer in that mindful listening or intentional listening, around providing and creating empathy. It's been something that I've seen have a transformative effect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, beautiful. No, definitely, I agree with you. And I have to say for myself, I think with all the challenges and happenings in the world now. It's definitely something I needed to really sit with myself too, and just kind of start listening and trying to understand more around white privilege. And I really realized at some point, like, oh my God, no, I was colorblind, because I was just like, yeah, but everybody's the same. But now, no. And it really helped me over the last couple of years to really shift on that. And it's so important. And really having those conversations. So thank you for doing that. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. It reminds me of traveling, and you don't realize that you have an accent, or you have certain ways that you do things culturally until you enter into another culture, or until you're in another environment. And I think a lot of times, people who are in the dominant culture anywhere don't have to examine the fact that there's a certain perspective that they have. And
Yes.
so the whole idea behind the Just Listen project is to set the intention to listen to others, and to kind of appreciate the fact that you're coming from a particular perspective. We all are coming from a particular perspective. So I think it's great to kind of come to that realization, whether it's through mindfulness, or whether it's through conversation, or through listening. It's important.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. Yeah. And I really consider mindfulness and emotional intelligence, of course, as well, really important tools to really, start on the individual level to really understand our emotions, our thoughts, maybe as well our biases around things, because we have all these experiences and like how we grew up. It's all like, every person is so different. And then from there, when we look back now into the work environment, really using that emotional capacity and bringing it into the teams. And as I learned as well, that it really correlates with better like teamwork, but then as well leadership performance. I love how you kind of implemented that place with the Just Listen project as well, around bringing that conversation to work as well. And when we look into like diversity, equity, and inclusion, I really believe that is like mindfulness is kind of the foundation for the work there too. Can you maybe share a little bit about that? What your thoughts are on that?
Yeah, absolutely. On multiple sides of the issue.
Right.
A lot of inclusion is based in awareness, and mindfulness is non-judgment. I think of it as non-judgmental awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Typically of self, but is what we think of it as, but it could be awareness of all sorts of other things too, being mindful of. And that awareness is necessary not only on the side of people listening and examining their own biases, but also people who've suffered trauma and who have been
Right.
subject to bias. The awareness around how that trauma might show up, the awareness around how that might affect our voices in the workplace, particularly thinking of women and underrepresented ethnicities or cultures or backgrounds in the workplace. There's a greater tendency toward this imposter syndrome, a greater tendency toward not pulling up a seat to the table where you may belong.
Mm-hmm.
And all of those things, reappraising those stories and reappraising our value requires an awareness around what's created how we show up, what our stories are. And so on both sides, whether you're examining your bias or whether you're subject to bias, just these tools of mindfulness and creating internal space and being able to see our stories and see our history is just a critical piece of the puzzle,
Right.
I think.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. Yeah, definitely. And when we go back now a little bit more into your role at the CEO now at Enso Wealth, you mentioned already a few things that you maybe, like you, for example, do a check-in. Do you have more things rolled out? You mentioned already it's not mandatory for people in the work environment to practice mindfulness, but do you have specific things you offer in the work environment on that end?
Yes, and for us, it is mostly about the invitation. And so a lot of our whole mission is translating wealth into fulfillment. And so we have a very specific kind of process that we think of fulfillment as that has mindfulness incorporated in one of the stages. So we talk about this waterfall of fulfillment where It starts with engaging in loving and trusting relationships. And then the outgrowth of those loving and trusting relationships is self-actualization. So we talk about self-awareness and so self-discovery, self-awareness, and then self-mastery being these critical components of fulfillment. And so we focus on those two things. And then third, we talk about co-creation. And then after that, we talk about personal gain with gratitude being that final step. But we try to unpack each of those steps in different ways. And so for loving and trusting relationships and for that self-discovery, we have things like at all of our partners meetings, we do a question of the night where we would go around, and after we have some sort of kind of settling in exercise, instead of having a dinner where you have multiple different conversations and people going in different directions, we'd have things like we'd have one question that goes around to every person at the table, and they're very introspective questions. Like, I think one of the ones that always comes to mind for me is we had a question about what's a story that you've been told or a story you told yourself that no longer serves you. And it draws people in, and we had tears, we had
yes,
laughs, we had all sorts of things at those conversations. But we started that conversation with this idea of examining our stories, and we started with a settling kind of mindfulness practice. And in my mind, as somebody who's kind of the keeper of our company culture, those things have drawn us closer, have brought a different level of trust and compassion for one another. And I think, mindfulness is one of the ties that binds all these sort of culture building exercises together, as well as the intention to love and trust.
Yes. And when we talk about your own practice, like, can you maybe share something with the listeners you are doing for yourself? Is there a specific, like, are you really controlled about, or like really firm with like doing something every day? Or because you mentioned in the beginning already that you said like you can definitely tell when you don't follow like specific practices for yourself, that you can feel a difference. And I do the same. Yeah.
I can.
Yeah.
So I've gotten pretty regimented about it, although I play sometimes with the ingredients. And so for me, it's a morning practice. I find my day is set best when I start in the morning. I have a very long affirmation that I have to read. It's so long. So I read an affirmation every morning. And then from there, I go straight into my mindfulness meditation. Usually with the Headspace app, sometimes in quiet. So I'll sit and, for at least 15 minutes and do that. And then after that, a really important part for me has become journaling. And so part of it that I've been calling it my self-intimacy practice. Like really something I started out thinking of it as self-compassion, but really it's an intent to kind of get closer to myself. And I think I started in mindfulness, like examining what's going on with the self, examining sort of what thoughts arise. But then when I do it in writing, I actually am having a conversation, like a clear conversation with myself. So talking to myself in my journal. And I was giggling with my wife about it because it seems so peculiar when I tell people about this practice. But negative self-talk is really normalized. If I was telling people that I was talking to myself negatively and kind of harshly, like people don't think twice about it. But when I tell people that I'm talking to myself in this healthy manner or talking to myself, I try to lean toward talking to myself positively in writing. It's, people's eyebrows sort of twist up and I get these funny looks. So it's just like bringing mindfulness into the workplace takes some courage. I've been trying to share with people that I've been having this kind of self intimacy relationship, this self-compassion cultivation practice in order to help normalize that for other people. But that's the affirmation, it's the quiet time, and then it's the journaling. And then I usually try to do so I'll look at my calendar and then I'll try to do some sort of visioning of my day and looking at how a day would go well. I think those are and then coffee.
Yes.
Coffee is a key piece to my mindfulness practice.
Yeah, I exactly do the same. I'm always kind of like, and now I'm going to have my coffee afterwards. I'm really looking forward to it. But it needed a while, I have to admit. Like in the beginning, it was always like I woke up and I'm like, oh, I want my coffee. And then at some point I was like, no, I need to do my practice first. And then it's funny how we are such habit people, right? And then it shifts and it's totally fine to do it that way now. It's actually that I'm craving that moment for myself. I do kind of a very similar practice. I just implement more yoga to it too. I love really the movement to come into my body. But I really love the affirmation piece, and then as well, like the sitting practice, and then as well, writing. I think it's so powerful to really write down, because a lot of times we don't even realize what kind of thoughts are patterns and just like coming constantly again. And when you write down these specific days, you can really follow up and see like, oh, wow, this seems like a very important topic for me. Or as you mentioned, like the self-talk, especially the negative self-talk, is so crucial to understand and see.
Yeah,
That has been really, yeah. Go ahead, sorry.
absolutely. Yeah, so I have a very my mix. I've played around with the order of these things, but I found, so when I was doing, I initially was doing the mindfulness practice first, like first thing in the morning when I woke up. I found partially that I was kind of groggy, right, rather than having that right balance of alertness and stillness. And so just reading something beforehand was helpful. But I was when I'm reading this affirmation, this truth that I want to say to myself, I've also noticed that I'm putting that story in first. And so rather than my mindfulness practice being all the thoughts about my workday that would arise as soon as I open my eyes, or all these kind of thoughts, which are fine, right? Like everything that comes up is in there, so it's fine. I now realize that some of the thoughts that I have in my stillness are leaning more toward what I'm reading in my affirmation and more toward positive. So it becomes this kind of reinforcing thing. And then that goes into this positive and healthy relationship with myself writing. And then that goes into the specific vision of my day. So like I've come to this order, and I'll probably change it all next week, but I've come to this order that I think makes sense for me. And so I just have learned to wake up very excited and enthused about dropping into those practices.
Nice. Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Maybe I would love to talk a little bit about one thing which is really important, like on my path, because I really truly believe only awareness really can create change. And that we in the world really need a mind shift. This is why I'm kind of just having the name #mindshift talk as well, on how we operate on a global level, but then as well kind of, not only in the corporate world, but as well in our personal lives. And really creating a gateway to a more humane and conscious future again. And I feel like the Just Listen project, for example, you started, really fits right in there, really bringing that back, that humanity. And like what I'm noticing on you in general is really bringing more that humanness back into the workplace too, right? And yeah, I would love to hear a little bit. What's your take on that? Like, what's maybe your vision around that too? You said already you want to really go into that path more as well around the Just Listen project, and yeah, maybe you can share a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I all of these things to me. So mindfulness, empathy, humanness. I think one of the concepts that's in all of these things is the idea of vulnerability, and really, I think for me that's a form of courage, but the vulnerability comes from like a non-judgmental sort of approach to the self, and this non-judgmental willingness to come out and be seen, and then the empathy is this willingness to see. And so for me, my intention for the workplace, my intention for kind of society with the Just Listen project is to see more humanly,
Yes.
and also to be seen, right, more human. And so I think the unifying theme around all of the work that I'm doing, whether it's at Enso or with the Just Listen project or with Uplifting Capital, is really to kind of strip some of these armoring layers that we put on in order to protect ourselves, or maybe even without awareness, and kind of show up and better connect with each other. When I talk about that waterfall of Enso's culture, it's also my own kind of waterfall of values, and it starts with engaging in loving and trusting relationships. And I think in order to have those sorts of relationships, we need to examine and remove some of the things that are disconnectors, right? That get in the way. And a lot of that is around just an unwillingness to be vulnerable, or an inability to be vulnerable, and an unwillingness to empathize, or an inability to empathize. And so for me, like that humanness is what leads to the good stuff.
Yes.
Really
Yeah.
meaningful
No,
relationships.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing all this, and yeah, taking your time out of your busy day probably to really show up. And yeah, I admire your courage and like your vulnerability you're bringing into the world as well, with sharing your story and like bringing these projects into the world. And yeah, there's a lot more to do around this, and I'm looking forward to learn more on your path as well, following like the Just Listen project, but then as we will see what else you bring into the world on that end. And I will definitely share the Just Listen project link in the notes below on the podcast. So I'm encouraging the listeners to really check out your amazing work. And yeah, I thank you so much for taking the time today and sharing, and yeah, bringing your insight and wisdom to #Mindshift Talk. And yeah, I wish you really all the best for your personal and as well professional journey.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. This was #Mindshift Talk. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned for our next episode with another amazing leader sharing their journey. To learn more about CreateMindSpace, please check out katrinbuisman.com. My gratitude goes out to my sister Tomke for bringing this to life with me.